Hey y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey guys, I'm Bud Elliott, and welcome back again to another episode of College Football Summer School, a production of the Cover 3 Podcast. And we are joined today by David Woods of BruinReportOnline. David, glad to have you back.
Glad to be back, Bud. Thanks for having me.
I think the last time we chatted, it was the 24/7 Sports Around the Clock series. So these have been going great so far. I knocked out a lot of the Pac-12 episodes today, and I'm really excited here to talk about this. UCLA had one of its best years in recent memory last season. Some frustrating games and some pretty fun wins, especially that LSU win to open the season. What's the overall mood right now in Westwood?
I would say it's still a lot of people not necessarily satisfied with the Chip Kelly era. I think the last season put some people back on the fence who had fallen off. Fans are a fickle beast. An 8-4 year, it wasn't what a lot of people had dreamed of because it was felt of as kind of a culmination year for Chip Kelly, but it was obviously a significant improvement over the previous 3 years. So I think there's a wait and see again, because this year they got some unexpected guys back, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Zach Charbonnet. So there's a belief that, maybe they can put it together and have a 8-4 or 9-3 season this year and show some continued progress. So I think there's, obviously they gave Chip Kelly an extension this past offseason. So there's some belief, well, let's see how the next year or two goes and make our determinations from there from a fan base perspective.
No doubt about it. So we'll start first on the offensive side, just trying to fill in some blanks I have here after reading Bruin Report Online and checking out, some of the spring game. DTR is still there. I think that's a good thing, but clearly UCLA was also pursuing guys in the transfer portal for that spot. How much of a good thing is that good thing, if it's a good thing?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when Dorian talked about that at the first, I think, spring availability for him, he said Chip Kelly was actually trying to push him out. That was because it was timed around the time that he was they were pursuing Dylan Gabriel, who eventually went to Oklahoma. But I think it's a good thing because the Dorian Thompson-Robinson that I think everyone has in their mind's eye is sophomore Thompson-Robinson, who was the king of the empty-handed fumble where he would just be running and then drop the ball. He more or less excised the critical mistakes from his game by midway through his junior year, but certainly in his senior year. I would say senior year, Dorian was probably a top 3 or 4 quarterback in the league. I think this year he's going to be, again, one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the league. Obviously, there's been a lot of changeover, so it's not that hard, and it should be for a 5th-year quarterback. But I think UCLA fans should be excited about the 5th-year version. One thing we've noticed in spring is just the level of calmness to his play has really, really improved because, for the longest time it was inexperience. He's not there yet. He doesn't have the reps. I mean, he might go down now as the most played quarterback in UCLA history in terms of games played. So that's not an excuse anymore. And he's starting to show the reality of those reps. Like, he's out there and he's looking like the calm veteran. They have him mic'd up from a few of these practices, and it's just obvious that he's the leader of this offense in a way that he wasn't even last year.
That's awesome to hear. If I recall, as a recruit, he didn't get to play a whole lot because he was behind Tate Martell. Wasn't he also younger than grade level?
Yeah, he is, and he's still pretty young. I mean, for a 5th-year guy, I think he's maybe just 21, maybe 22. But he's very young for his class, especially with the way guys are held back these days. And in high school, he was not a full-time starter until his final year. So there was a real learning curve for him, but I think he's now kind of gotten there.
For sure. Your comments echo those of our Pitt guys, who talked about how it slowed down really for Kenny Pickett last year in a way that they really weren't expecting. Just all of a sudden the game slowed down and he killed it at Pitt, and he'll likely be drafted potentially in the first round come Thursday night. We're recording this, by the way, on Monday. Not really sure what the release schedule will be. Just kind of depends on everybody's availability on the Cover 3 podcast. So moving over to the pass catchers, Kyle Phillips and Dulcich and Coda are gone. Am I wrong to think that's a pretty big deal?
It is. So the one thing that was the biggest, so it's a big deal. Start there. But the one thing that was obvious this spring, I think from what we saw, which was even with Mike Martinez out, who was the, ostensibly he would have been the first string tight end, even though he's more of a blocking guy. Chip Kelly is working his voodoo magic yet again with the tight end position. Michael Ezike, I think he's now a 5th-year guy.
That's a throwback name. I remember him from the LA Nike camp.
Who basically who has done very little since his freshman year. Looked like a monster in spring. And then the guy behind him, Hunter Habermill, who's a walk-on, looks like he's a legit player. He's like 6'7", big, 260, moves well, catches the ball really, really well, high points it, can catch in traffic. Like he would be a different type of, walk-on turned player than Greg Dulcich, who's more of a speed guy. But Habermill looks like he could be a contested catch guy, and he was also really, really good this spring. Whatever he's putting in the water for those tight ends, it's really working out. And then at outside receiver positions, I think that's where it's going to be a slight question mark. Jake Bobo, the Duke transfer, looks like he's a player, and he was already kind of developing a rapport and a comfort level with Thompson-Robinson this spring. But the other spots, I don't know that you find an easy replacement for Kyle Phillips. Logan Loya was kind of the Phillips understudy the last couple of years. He looked okay in spring, but it's hard to project that because Phillips was a day one guy. He looked exactly the same way he looked as a senior, which was reliable 50 to 60 catch guy. And I don't know that anyone's going to be that. Kasmir Allen is one to watch. I think I cited this last year when we were talking before the season, and it sort of turned out that way by the end of the year. This year, in spring, he's been a full-time, more or less, first-string guy in the slot. He's really explosive, got a lot of speed. What we didn't see this spring, which I'm anticipating being the case by fall, is that he'll get some work in the backfield as well. But he should be a guy who reliably catches, 30 balls this year.
Switching over to the offensive line, I'm a little concerned about this group just because the guys who got the accolades, and especially like Sean Ryan, he's not a scheme fit guy. He's just a dude, and he's off to the league. Can Chip work some magic here? 3 of the top 5 guys gone, it looks like, by snap count.
So I think the interior is going to be more or less fine. Sam Maraza, who was the starter last year at center for most of the year, he's been out with an injury that lingered over from last year. Duke Clemens, though, took basically every single first string rep at center, and he looked good. And then I think at the other 2 guard spots, John Gaines and Antonio Mafi. Mafi was the converted defensive lineman who's played on the offensive line the last couple of years. They both looked good. They both look fine. It's tackle that's going to be the concern, which isn't a big surprise because, as you noted, Sean Ryan's off, but also starting right tackle from last year, Alec Anderson's off for potentially pursuing the NFL as well, leaving not a whole lot. Garrett DeGiorgio, who got some snaps at right tackle last year, but was by no means like a consistent playtime guy. He was the first string left tackle for all of spring. And at right tackle, they had Josh Carlin and another converted defensive lineman, a freshly converted defensive lineman, in Tyler Manoa at right tackle. So, and it looked about the way I'm describing it. It was not good. You've got a guy who's got right tackle feet trying to play left tackle, and he couldn't handle any kind of speed rush in practice. And then on the right side, it was a mixed bag. Manoa has talent and potential, but he's a senior. He's going to have like 1 year to try to do this, but he looked okay. He could move his feet a little bit, but just getting fatigued with, I think, the mental demands of the position and everything. Tackle's a major concern. So they've got Rutgers transfer Rayquan O'Neill coming in this summer, and the hope is that he can hit the ground running and potentially slot in right at left tackle, and then maybe move DeGiorgio over to right tackle, maybe have Manoa make a big leap in his development, or continue to hit the transfer portal and see if there's another tackle available. But if you're looking for a major concern with the offense next year, it's offensive line, particularly offensive tackle.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I haven't done, I think this is the 30th of these that I've done so far in the first couple of weeks. Almost every person I interview says, yeah, they really need an offensive tackle in the transfer portal. So that will be hotly contested for sure.
Anybody who played Madden back in the early 2000s knows the value of a left tackle. And I think the reality is, and it was always going to be the case, if you're going to be overly dependent on the transfer portal, which I think UCLA is getting towards being overly dependent on it, the premium positions are going to be hard to come by. They just are. And I think even O'Neill, you know, I liked him at Rutgers. I mean, from what I saw of him, but he's not Sean Ryan, and he might not be Alec Anderson.
Yeah, I heard mixed reports, like from some different schools I know that were talking to him. Some wanted him, and some were not convinced. And
they need him. Yeah. And he from what I saw at Rutgers, he'll be a 2-deep guy no matter what. But that's the reality of what UCLA has at tackle. It's just not very good, and I think that's the major concern, because UCLA does move around its tackles a lot. Like, it likes to pull them, it likes to do a lot of variety with them, and if you don't have guys who can master, because spring practice is basics, like you're just block your man. And if you don't have guys who can master the basics, then you're not going to be able to develop too much off of it.
For sure. I guess the one saving grace there is Colorado's edge rusher, who's now escaping my mind. He's off of the league, and Arizona State, Eric Gentry, just hit the portal today, assuming he goes back east. That would be my guess. So maybe a little bit lesser load, and also Utah lost their top pass rusher.
Davon Thibodeau's out.
Well. Yeah. And Thibodeau's gone. So maybe a little bit less pass rush juice in the Pac-12 this year to expose that. Let's talk about UCLA's own defense here.
Mm-hmm.
They've got kind of a revolving door here. Dave, I got some questions on this. So they lose their top 2 defensive linemen by snap count, but you bring in Sykes from Harvard and Smith from Duke, and who are we? Is that a worry that the front line?
I would say so.
Okay.
So we still haven't seen Sykes because he doesn't come until the summer. Gary Smith was in for a few days, and he got. So I'm not sure if he got hurt or if it was a conditioning issue, because he didn't look. Honestly, he looked like a guy who'd taken about 4 months off of a football program when he was out there, just getting winded really easily. Looked like he'd maybe packed on a little bit too much weight. So I don't know yet about him. When he was in there, he looked stout. Like, he looked like he'd hold the point, the whole thing. Right now, the defensive tackle rotation, especially with Odua Isabor transferring out, because he was first string 3-tech for most of the spring. It's going to be some combination of Jay Toia, Martin Andrews, and then right now the starting 3-tech looks like Quentin Somerville, who was a former recruit a couple classes ago. It's just hard to project. Andrus has basically missed most of the last 3 years due to injury, and he's going to be counted on to provide 2 deep. Toia looked promising, and by all accounts dominated USC's spring practice a year ago before transferring into UCLA, but he hasn't really looked like that at UCLA. He's been fine. He's been a plugger, but he's not disrupting everything. I think what they're going, so the defensive scheme is moving more towards a 4-3. Everything is such hybrid stuff these days that it's hard to completely glean, but 4-3, 4-2-5, which means the 3-tech is going to be back to being a primary pass rushing position.
Yeah.
And they don't have that guy right now. And I think to keep pressure off the edges, they're going to need to have that guy. Now, one thing I would cite is Gabriel and Grayson Murphy, the North Texas transfers who came in this spring. They were doing a lot of unique pass rush looks with those two lining up together on one side, and then having Carl Jones, who's kind of a small speed rusher, on the other side, and just having one true defensive tackle out there. And those were intriguing. I don't think they'd be able to do them every down, but they might be able to mix and match some things. And I think, all things considered, the defensive front should be able to get more base pass rush without having to blitz than they have in the past couple of years.
In your estimation, you lose Mitchell Agude, you lose Caleb Johnson, but you bring in the Murphy guys from North Texas. Is that a net positive, negative, kind of a wash? What are you thinking there?
It's a tough one. So I would say the Murphys. So here's the thing. I think the scheme change is a net positive for the personnel they have. And I think if Agude was still there playing in this scheme, he would look a lot more productive than he looked at UCLA in years past. I think, and he said this, I think, in one of his quotes after transferring, I'm allowed to play more, 9. I'm allowed to play outside the tight end sometimes, which really benefits me because I'm more of a speed guy. And that was always true. And he was stuck playing, sometimes he was playing like 4-eye in there.
Oh, wow.
Okay, he was having to hold up against guards and tackles sometimes. So it's good for him to be in that role, but he would have been a little bit more with this. But what I would say is, the Murphys look really good. I don't know what they are as NFL prospects because they're both like 6'2", 260, and that does not project as many defensive ends I see. But they're going to be really good college players. And I think at the Pac-12 level, they can absolutely make an impact. They've looked real. And look, caveat, that offensive line work in progress, but they've looked really disruptive in spring. So I would say net upgrade because there's two of them. I think Agude would have been similarly disruptive in this sort of system. But between them and Carl Jones, who we've been banging the drum for Carl Jones for a couple years now as a speed rush guy over at Bruin Report Online. The previous staff, and I'm referring to them as previous staff because there's been almost total defensive coaching changeover. I don't think they knew exactly what they had there. Maybe this staff appears to, like, they are playing him. He's getting first string reps really consistently. So I think a combination of the scheme change plus the personnel, I think they're going to have a better pass rush, and I think it's going to look more productive than it did with Agude.
It may have to, obviously, because finishing here with the defensive backs, 5 of the top 6 snap count guys are gone in the secondary, but Davies comes in from Oregon. You get Hearn from Wyoming. What's the general the feeling there, if you could?
Yeah, it's inexperience at some spots. I think at safety, you've got Stephen Blaylock, who's back, and you've also got Mo Osling has looked like the major first-string safety alongside Blaylock. And then the corners, honestly, I think one of the most talented guys on the defense is one of the likely starting corners this year, which is Devin Kirkwood. He's been really impressive in spring, and he's showing the confidence of a guy now, like a dude. You know, he's not a freshman out there trying to, remember the plays. He's got that kind of swagger to him, which you just, not every position do you need it, but at cornerback, you really do. You need to be kind of I'm erasing that play from my brain because I'm the world's greatest, and I'm going to go out there and now dominate this guy. And so he's looked really good. The other spot is more the question mark. John Humphreys has gotten a lot of reps. He looks the part. He looks like a Kirkwood clone. He's like, again, 6'1", 6'2", really long, moves well. Hasn't quite, produced the same way. But he got a little bit of playing time last year and the year before. And then Hearn from Wyoming, he looks like he's going to play a little bit of outside corner, going to play a little bit of nickel. They seem to be doing, and this is where I think it's spring, so it's install. They seem to be doing some interesting things with the nickel. They've got a couple different, I think, variations on what they're doing there. Sometimes it'll be Hearn. Sometimes it'll be Kenny Churchwell, who's a much bigger safety type, who's almost like a safety linebacker. And they've been cross-training a couple of guys, Churchwell included, with both linebackers and safeties. So I think that's going to be kind of a nickel backer role at times versus just a pure cover nickel. And then, I think there's the major concern there is not necessarily the first string. I think they're going to get competent enough play out of the defensive backfield. And the fact that they're actually going to get pass rush this year without blitzing, which I think they will. I'm confident I'm confident enough to say that maybe that will actually happen this year versus my absolute pronouncements that it will not in years past. That should make the defensive backfield look better than it has the last couple of years, even with less experience. But the issue is there's virtually no depth at safety, and not a whole lot at corner either. So if they do lose some guys to injury, or if production does not match practice performance for some of these guys, they could be in a world of hurt.
All right, that is UCLA with our friend David Woods. Who has to go and I believe do carpool pickup line, right? So
that's exactly right.
Been there. Many thanks. Bruin Report Online is the absolute best spot in the world for any kind of UCLA coverage you guys want. Bruin Report Online podcast as well. BRO for everything. Dave, really appreciate the time again.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it, man.
All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see you all soon.